December 14th, 1943, Derby, England. Cold rain swept across the Midlands, drumming on the tin rooftops of the Rolls-Royce Experimental Division. The wind carried the scent of oil and metal, the taste of smoke and frost. Inside Hangar 17, a single bulb flickered above a stripped-down P-51 Mustang. Its aluminum skin glimmered like the belly of a sleeping dragon. Beneath it stood a man in a heavy coat, his breath turning to clouds in the dim light. His name was Allan Cartwright, a 34-year-old engineer who hadn't been home before midnight in months. He wasn't a pilot, nor a soldier, yet the war had etched itself into his face. The sleepless eyes, the trembling hands, the quiet fury that came from losing something you loved to a sky you could not reach. For Cartwright, that loss had a name. His brother, James, shot down over Bremen just 3 weeks earlier. The telegram still lay folded in his coat pocket, a constant weight against his heart. Tonight, he worked in silence. Every other engineer had gone home hours ago, but he refused to leave. On the steel table beside him sat a collection of hand-drawn schematics, grease-stained notes, and coffee rings. Across the page, circled in thick pencil, were the words Meredith Effect. The idea that heat itself, properly harnessed, could push an aircraft forward rather than slow it down. Cartwright adjusted his spectacles and stared at the radiator assembly of the Mustang. The Merlin engine, magnificent as it was, had an unforgivable flaw. Above 25,000 feet, it choked. Its coolant drag turned the Mustang into a flying brick when it needed to be a predator. The Luftwaffe's new jets, the Me-262s, were faster, higher, deadlier. Every Allied pilot knew it. Every engineer feared it. But Cartwright saw something different. He touched the edge of the radiator housing, feeling the cold metal against his fingertips. If heat is energy, he whispered to himself, then every degree wasted here is power lost to the wind. He grabbed a stub of white chalk and scrawled 3 words on the engine cowling. Heat equals thrust. The rain outside softened, replaced by the rhythmic ticking of cooling metal. He ran his hand across the chalked words, the way a painter steps back from a finished canvas. He wasn't mad, though the others said so. He was certain that if air passing through the radiator was heated, compressed, and expelled properly, it could produce thrust. A small push, yes, but one that could turn drag into speed. That idea had lived only in theory papers, never tested, never proven. Until now. He climbed into the cockpit of the test fuselage, the one stripped of wings and wheels, rigged only for stationary runs. With a twist of his wrist, the Merlin engine roared to life. The sound filled the hangar, deep and hungry. The gauges danced, the air trembled. He opened the cooling flaps and watched the airflow meters. For the first few seconds, nothing. Then the needle twitched. It moved again. Upward. Steady. Cartwright's pulse quickened. He leaned closer to the gauges, barely believing the numbers. The exhaust temperature was rising, but so was the airflow velocity. The radiator wasn't slowing the system down. It was accelerating it. The ridiculous idea was real. He shut off the engine, the sudden silence almost violent after the roar. The smell of hot metal and burnt fuel hung thick in the air. He exhaled shakily, his hands trembling. On the clipboard, he scribbled, measured thrust, positive direction, 7.3 pounds. It was small, but it was everything. He stared at the chalked words again. Heat equals thrust, and laughed under his breath. "You're not crazy, Allan," he said to the empty hangar. "You've just outsmarted drag itself." Then, from somewhere in the shadows behind the workbench, a sound. Metal clanged softly. A footstep. Another. He froze. The hangar was supposed to be locked. Slowly, he turned toward the noise. The light bulb above him flickered again, throwing long, jagged shadows across the walls. He could see nothing, only the shape of the Mustang and the faint outline of tool chests. "All right," he said, his voice low. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the groan of the wind pushing against the hangar doors. He took a cautious step forward, each creak of his boots echoing. For a moment, he thought he saw movement near the far wall. A flash of reflection, maybe glass, maybe eyes. Then nothing. He reached for the light switch on the wall, but before his hand touched it, the bulb above hissed and died. The hangar sank into total darkness. He stood still, heart hammering, listening. The rain had stopped entirely now. He could hear his own breathing and the soft ping of cooling metal from the Mustang's body. Then, quietly, the sound of the outer door closing. Whoever had been there was gone. Cartwright switched the light back on, but the bulb only buzzed weakly. The far wall was empty. Nothing disturbed. He moved to his workbench, His notes still there, the readings unchanged. Maybe it had been his imagination. Maybe exhaustion was finally catching up. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered. He looked again toward the door, locked it, and returned to his desk. He wrote one final line in his logbook before leaving. Test successful. Results unconfirmed. Must repeat before reporting. He didn't know it yet, but that decision, to wait until morning, would cost him everything. As he stepped out into the cold night, his breath meeting the fog, he paused for a moment to look back at the hangar. The light inside flickered once more, though no one remained to see it. The sound of distant aircraft engines rolled across the sky. RAF bombers returning from another mission over Germany. He watched their navigation lights glint faintly through the clouds, tiny beacons in the black. Somewhere up there, his brother's squadron had once flown. Somewhere up there, he had died. Cartwright whispered into the wind. Not in vain, James. Not in vain. The rain began again, thin and relentless. He pulled his coat tight and disappeared into the dark, leaving behind only the silent Mustang, the chalked equation, and the faint smell of burning fuel. But he wasn't alone. From a parked car beyond the perimeter fence, a figure sat motionless, binoculars in hand, watching the hangar. The glow of a cigarette ember flickered once, then faded. The engine started quietly, and the car rolled away down the empty road. Back inside the hangar, the chalk on the fuselage began to smudge as moisture seeped through the cracked roof. The words blurred slowly under the dripping water until only one word remained legible. Thrust. You're watching WW2 Frontline Legends. If stories like this remind you that a single spark of genius can change the fate of nations, then hit subscribe right now. And tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. It's incredible to see these untold war stories reach viewers from every corner of the world. Dawn came pale and brittle over Derby, the kind of English morning that seemed to be stitched together out of damp wool and breath. Frost traced ferns across the hangar windows. The lock on the door turned with a tired click, and Allan Cartwright stepped inside with a thermos under his arm and yesterday's exhaustion still clinging to him. The smell met him first, cold metal, old oil, and a faint ghost of heat from the Merlin that had thundered into the night. He flicked on the lights. They buzzed, stuttered, and steadied. He looked for the chalk words by instinct. The smudged letters blurred into a pale smear, as if the hangar itself had tried to swallow the idea back into its bones. No matter. The notebook would tell the truth better than chalk ever could. He set the thermos down, slid the logbook from beneath the rag where he'd hidden it, and opened to the page with its small, decisive line. Measured thrust, positive direction, 7.3 pounds. He allowed himself the beginning of a smile, and then he turned toward the test rig. The smile died. The radiator housing was gone. Not disassembled. Not moved to another bench. Gone, as if it had been lifted by invisible hands and carried into a world that did not contain him. He had left the bracket wrench by the aft mount. Now the wrench lay on the floor, half under the fuselage, as if it had fallen during a hurried, clumsy movement. He crouched, ran his fingers over dustless prints on the mount points where bolts should have been. The metal was cold. Whatever had happened hours ago. He stood very still. The hangar's sound seemed to lean in around him. The distant cough of a vehicle, the dull thud of boots on concrete somewhere outside, the creak of the roof as the frost loosened its grip. His eyes moved to the workbench. The stack of schematics sat precisely where he had left them. He lifted the top sheet. Beneath it, the airflow graphs missing. The test readings missing. The hand-drawn duct cross-section missing. But the routine maintenance checklist remained, waiting in its usual place, smug with banality. Not a mess. Not a looting. A selection. He went to the door and checked the lock. No scratches. No splintered wood. The key had been used. He looked down at the ring in his hand. There were 4 keys to this hangar. His, the shift lead's, the quartermaster's spare, and the night foreman's. He thought of footsteps in the dark, and a door that had shut softly when the rain paused to listen. His hands shook once, and then steadied. He tucked the logbook into his coat, crossed the floor, and moved without hurry to the small office where the phone sat on a metal desk stamped with a ministry seal. He dialed the internal number for security. He gave his name, his post, the situation. The voice on the other end said very little. It told him to remain in the hangar. It told him not to touch anything else. It told him someone would come. They came fast. A staff car rolled to a clean, 4-wheeled certainty outside the hangar and stopped. 2 men in greatcoats stepped out, their caps low, their faces arranged into the kind of neutrality that did not belong to engineers. Behind them, a corporal followed with a satchel and a clipboard. They listened to him politely. They wrote down what he said. They asked him to point to where the missing parts had been, to show them how they had been mounted, to demonstrate how the test rig had operated. While he spoke, one officer wandered the perimeter of the space, as if measuring it with an unseen tape. The other stood close and watched Allan's mouth rather than his eyes. When they finished, the first officer called for the quartermaster, the shift lead, the night foreman. The men arrived one by one. The night foreman's gaze slid away just once, like a fish that had touched a line. The officer noticed. He noticed everything. He asked for keys. He checked notches and wear. He wrote down numbers. Then he asked Allan to step into the office. The door shut softly between the engineer and his Mustang. The questions were quick, precise, the kind a scalpel asks flesh before it opens a line. Who had access? Who else knew of his test? When did he first discover the theory? Which papers had he read? Had he written to anyone in London? Did anyone in America know? And then, spiraling closer, had he seen any unusual cars near the perimeter? Any unfamiliar faces? Had he argued with colleagues? Had anyone at all, expressed sudden interest in his radiator work? He told the truth, each answer clipped and dry. He did not mention the whisper in the dark. He did not mention the brand of cigarette ember beyond the fence, or the particular kind of quiet that follows a door closing by a hand that has done this before. He kept the logbook deep in his coat, where it warmed to his body and reminded him that something still lived that no one else could yet take. Then the questions shifted. The voice took on a weight he had not yet heard. Had he copied the drawings? Had he taken any material home? Had he been approached by anyone claiming to be ministry or from the American liaison? Had he received offers? Money? Promises? He nearly laughed, hardly slept, barely ate, and they asked him about promises. But he did not laugh. He answered, no, 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 no. And then the room changed proportions without moving. The officers produced a folder with papers already waiting for his name. They were not there to solve a puzzle. They were there to close it. One of them, still courteous, still professional, opened an envelope and removed a single photograph of a diagram very like his. The lines were familiar. The angle of the outlet vent was wrong. The notation called the duct a cooler shroud. The hand that labeled it belonged to a man he did not know. This, the officer said, tapping the photograph lightly, was recovered from a dead courier on the coast 2 weeks ago. We would prefer, and now he met Allan's eyes, that we not recover your radiator from a similar courier next week. The shape of the morning became clear. He felt a clean, bright fury arrive and sit down inside him like a guest who planned to stay. They had not come to ask. They had come to move him. He said as much, and both men smiled the way men sometimes smile when they have to knock on a friend's door in the middle of the night. By noon, the hangar was sealed. The quartermaster's key vanished into a pocket that did not return it. The shift lead signed a paper he did not read. The night foreman stared at the wall and agreed with whatever was asked. Allan rode in the back of the staff car with his hands folded and his logbook hidden and felt the roads of Derby fold behind him like maps pressed shut. The facility they took him to did not have a name, only a number and a distance. It existed farther north, in a basin the wind did not trouble. The gates opened for the staff car without questions, and the buildings inside had windows that did not see out. Here, he was given a workstation, a badge, a cot in a quiet room, and a request phrased as permission. Continue your work, speak to no one, write everything down, give us the originals. He worked. Days became a clean repetition. White lights, the smell of steel that always smelled newly cut, the thud of doors padded to close without echo. He drew his ducks again from memory, then improved them. He traced the flow with equations until the numbers trusted him enough to become shapes. He asked for materials. They arrived. He asked for time on a bench. It was granted. He asked who else was in the building. No one answered. In the night hours, when a silence thicker than blackout rested on the roofs, he removed the logbook from a hollow inside the cot where the mattress had been clumsy enough to accept a secret. He compared the old readings to the new and saw the same pattern emerge. Heat drawn over thin surfaces, air accelerated through a narrowing throat, pressure recovering into speed. He ran numbers for altitude, for air temperature, for throttle settings that would keep a pilot alive if he needed to stretch a climb or run a desperate chase. The effect held. Not a miracle, a margin. But margins are what wars use to make their decisions seem inevitable afterward. He was allowed one request to the outside in the first month. He asked for nothing with his family name on it, nothing with his town, nothing with the word brother. He asked for a copy of an old paper, Meredith's original work, printed once in an engineering journal that smelled of dust and the stubbornness of problems worth solving. It arrived in a brown envelope without a return address. The second month, a plane came in on a gray afternoon, landed somewhere he could not see, and left at dusk. The next morning, he found his duck drawn again, this time on American paper, the title in a tidy U.S. Army Air Force's hand. Thermal Thrust Integration, Mustang Cooling Assembly. He traced each line as if reading a letter someone had written him from a city he had never visited. They had adopted the angles, the throat lengths. They had tightened the exits. They had thickened the skins where the stress would live. He could feel the weight of a parallel team breathing at the edge of the page. Spring should have arrived. In that valley, it never quite did. Snow retreated and left behind a cold that refused to tell the truth about itself. He watched it from a window that wasn't meant for watching. He heard a distant engine note change key and thought he recognized the high, confident hum of a test run going right. They never told him outcomes. They told him inputs. They gave him questions like stones and asked him to build a bridge he'd never be allowed to cross. He gave them answers. He signed his initials where initials were required. He signed nothing where they were not. Then came a morning with a smell he had not tasted in months. Wet earth warming, oil that had coated a runway, exhaust in air that had decided to forgive something. A door he did not know opened. A captain he had not met asked him to follow. They walked through a corridor that had always been locked. They came to a room with a radio and a projector and chairs arranged for a small audience that would never be identified. The projector clattered and threw a rectangle of light onto a screen. Grainy film flickered to life. He saw sky first, then the sharp black silhouette of wings that belonged to a plane he loved with a loyalty that had outlived his own anger. A Mustang, high and clean, contrails soldiering the blue behind it. The camera chased. The Mustang banked. Another shape entered frame far ahead. Sleeker, snub-nosed, quick, the distant swagger of a machine that believed itself to be the future. A jet, descending toward a field whose edges quivered with heat haze. The narration came from a voice he didn't know, American, calm as a man reading a weather report. High-speed taxiing during approach left the jet vulnerable. The Mustang closed, not with the hunger of a sprint, but with the dignity of an athlete who knows exactly how much the race owes him. The film juddered. The distance collapsed. A snapshot moment caught the sunlight in the radiator scoop under the Mustang's belly. A detail glinting like a secret that had decided to come outside. He didn't blink. He watched the angles. He watched the rate of closure. He watched the line of the scoop and saw, as sure as a signature, the adjustments he had made in a room with no windows. The effect was there. Not magic. Mathematics obeyed. The projector snapped off. The room returned to its ordinary light. The captain said nothing. Allan said nothing. The captain folded the chair back into the table, as if preparing a room for a conversation that would never occur, and then led him away. He slept for the first time that week without waking into a fist of fear. When he rose, the valley's light had found a new color it had apparently misplaced all winter. He took his logbook from its hiding place and wrote a line without measuring it. The air will carry a pilot if you teach it how to want him. It wasn't engineering. It was something else. He left it there anyway. News entered sealed places the way water enters stone. Slow, patient, incorrect at first, then correct enough to build over. Pilots in France began to tell the sky new stories. The Mustang could climb a little cleaner now. It could run a little longer, without the needle inching toward the red with a pilot's heart riding it. A German jet could still outpace it in the open. But during approach, heavy with fuel lines warm, and the runway a promise the pilot had already begun to believe, the jet had to slow. It had to commit. And in that time between intention and contact with Earth, the Mustang could claim it. They said this in mess halls, over tin mugs of something that had once agreed to be coffee. They said it in letters that passed through hands that read every word in order to black out only the wrong ones. They said it into microphones that would become transcripts that would become details buried in reports that would become wisdom that would grow old and pretend it had always been obvious. He asked for nothing. He was given nothing. Work continued. Equations took the place of applause and behaved better. One afternoon, he walked past a room and heard his own duct described with a name that did not include his. Enhanced Meredith integration. The syllables fit comfortably in another person's mouth. He returned to his bench and adjusted a curve by half a degree. Weeks later, the captain appeared again. No projector this time. No film. A folder. A single sheet slid across the table. It was a summary stamped with a red block of ink that made every word beneath it obedient. He read the first paragraph. It praised a joint team for their work. It credited an initiative with an acronym that had been born out of nothing and had somehow acquired parents. It explained that secrecy required certain omissions. He looked for his name. It was not there. There was a space where it could have been. The space remained loyal to the air around it. He handed the sheet back. He asked if he could return to Derby. The captain told him not yet. Spring folded into summer. The war changed its verbs. Push became enter. Enter became liberate. The sky filled with the sound of machines that had learned how to endure. He read none of it. He felt it through the building the way a house feels the footfalls of a child grown heavier. At last, a morning came when the valley's gate opened for a car pointed south. He climbed in with his satchel. The logbook lay inside with its pages softened by the press of nights when ink had been the only witness. No one spoke. Fence went to field, field to road, road to towns that had kept their roofs and their habits. Derby arrived the way places do when they have agreed to survive, pretending they had never been afraid. The hangar key they gave him was new. The lock recognized it anyway. Inside, the Mustang waited with the patience of an animal that knows who feeds it. The test rig had been replaced, the bench cleared, the tools aligned in a geometry that did not belong to him. On the wall, a fresh chart hung, official drafted printed. It depicted a cooling assembly that wore his thinking like a uniform tailored by another hand. At the bottom, a line of credits named a committee. He stood a long time without moving. The lights hummed as if they remembered him. The dust motes shifted through the beam like tiny decisions that would never be recorded. He set the satchel down, opened the logbook, and read the line he had written in winter when the air he breathed had been more blade than gift. He touched the number 7.3 with the tip of a finger, as if to sign it again with skin. He turned the page and found a space. He drew a small throat and an exit turn that would smooth the turbulence another fraction. He noted the expected gain in efficiency like a man placing a coin on a grave. Not for the dead, but for his own continuing. That evening, he walked out into the yard behind the hangar and listened. Somewhere far south, a bomber climbed into a sky that had learned to share itself more fairly. Somewhere to the east, men removed insignia from aircraft that would never wear them again. The air lay between those facts like a ledger balanced at last. He slept in his small room with the window cracked for a breeze and a memory. Before he surrendered to the tide, he saw again the projector's rectangle, the Mustang closing, the scoop alight with the idea that had become its own. He thought of James, who would not have cared for credit if the planes had come home. He thought of the officers, who had asked their questions because it was their job to suspect as much as it was his to trust the way heat and speed negotiate. Morning found him at the bench, drawing a curve half a degree tighter. Far away, on a runway whose dust had not settled since dawn, a Mustang's engine turned over, coughed, caught, and sang. The pilot checked instruments and felt the readiness of a machine that had chosen to live through him. He eased the throttle. The aircraft rolled. The scoop below his feet accepted the wind and made a bargain. The tail lifted, the wheels left earth, and for a moment known only to those who have measured such things in long nights and chalk, the radiator did not steal, it gave. No one told Allan that. He did not need telling. He could hear it, faintly, impossibly, through walls and miles and the small, trustworthy wonders by which a world decides to go on. May 8, 1945, London, England. The war was ending. Bells rang over rooftops that still wore the soot of years spent hiding their light. The newspapers used words like victory and deliverance. In pubs and in queues and under banners that had waited too long to be unfolded, people smiled for the first time without apology. The sky above the Thames belonged again to gulls instead of sirens. Inside a quiet government building near Whitehall, clerks moved like ants through corridors lined with files. Names became numbers. Numbers became dust. And somewhere among those shelves, in a folder marked Meredith Integration Project, the initials AC were typed once and then replaced by a blank. A pen line crossed through it neatly, as though history itself had been edited for efficiency. Allan Cartwright never saw that folder. He had been released quietly from the northern facility 2 months earlier, handed a certificate of commendation without a title and a railway voucher to Derby. No explanations. No farewells. Just a nod from a man in a coat who said, "Your work has been invaluable," before walking away. Derby greeted him like an old photograph, familiar but drained of color. The airfield buzzed with life again. The war's ending had turned repair shops into museums of triumph. Mechanics whistled. Pilots visited to sign autographs for the apprentices who'd once fueled their planes. Posters of the P-51 Mustang hung proudly everywhere, calling it the jet killer. The men talked about its new cooling system, a miracle of Allied engineering, they called it. Cartwright listened, hands in pockets, and said nothing. He took a small room in town, one overlooking the rail yard. The clatter of freight cars suited him. He spent his mornings walking to the edge of the field to watch the last of the Mustangs take off for parades and demonstrations. He recognized the scoop beneath the fuselage every time. The subtle curve of the duct was his signature in metal, though no one knew it. In the evenings, he wrote notes, reflections, sketches of alternate designs that would never be built. He recorded temperatures, airflow ratios, and half-forgotten dreams. Sometimes he would pause mid-sentence, caught by the memory of his brother's laugh echoing from another time, another life. He kept the old telegram folded inside the logbook. It was yellowed now, soft as fabric at the edges. One afternoon, a radio broadcast cut through the hum of the workshop. The announcer spoke proudly about the revolutionary cooling system that gave the Mustang its edge. The voice mentioned names, American, British, familiar to the public. Committees, corporations, divisions. No mention of Allan. He smiled faintly and turned off the radio. The room fell into a silence so complete he could hear the tick of a wrench cooling on the bench. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote again on the wall above his desk. The same 3 words. Heat equals thrust. Outside, the factory whistle blew for the end of shift, and the world went on. Years passed quietly. The war receded into memory, then into myth. Children played in fields where once searchlights had scissored the sky. Jet engines replaced propellers. The sound of flight changed from roar to scream. Cartwright grew older, but his hands never forgot the texture of aluminum or the rhythm of a well-tuned engine. In 1952, an American magazine ran an article titled "The Mustang Legacy," how a cooling trick beat the jets. The pages showed diagrams that made him pause, his own airflow patterns, redrawn by another hand. He read the caption beneath, "The genius of collaborative wartime innovation." The phrase was neat, harmless, perfectly true, and perfectly wrong. He closed the magazine and slipped it into a drawer. Some inventions, he decided, belonged more to necessity than to men. The war had demanded speed, and he had simply answered. That was enough. But fate, like air, has a way of circling back. In 1971, long after the world had moved on to supersonic jets and moon landings, a janitor cleaning out an old records room at the Ministry of Supply came across a box labeled declassified, obsolete engineering files. Inside were brittle papers, test notes, and one photograph, a Mustang prototype half disassembled in a Derby hangar. On the fuselage, barely visible beneath the film grain, were 3 chalked words. The janitor leaned close, squinting at the smudge. Heat equals thrust. He turned the photo over. In faint pencil, 2 initials, AC. The janitor handed the box to a clerk, who filed it without comment. The papers went to archives, the photograph to a curator sorting material for a new exhibit on Allied aircraft innovation. Months later, it hung in a glass case at the back of the museum. Visitors passed by without noticing the chalk marks, drawn instead by the polished nose of the Mustang beside it. And yet, every so often, someone would pause. Someone with a mechanic's eye or a pilot's memory would point to the scoop under the fuselage and whisper to whoever stood next to them. That's where the magic happened. They'd trace the curve of the duct in the air, describing how the heated airflow inside produced thrust, how it changed the rules of drag forever. They didn't know the name of the man who'd first imagined it in a rain-soaked hangar, but they spoke his idea into the air again, and that was a kind of resurrection. In the final years of his life, Allan Cartwright tended a small garden behind his cottage. He liked the sound of engines overhead, commercial jets now, not fighters, and sometimes he would look up, eyes narrowing against the sun, and wonder if the air still remembered him. When he died, the logbook was found in a drawer beside the bed. Its pages were brittle, but the ink had held. On the last sheet, in handwriting grown shaky but deliberate, was a single line. The air will carry a pilot if you teach it how to want him. The curator who later cataloged the notebook wrote in her report, "Unidentified engineer, possibly associated with early Mustang design." She didn't know she was holding the quiet heartbeat of an era. And so the story remained, a whisper under the roar of history. Today, the P-51 Mustang still flies at airshows, its engine note sharp and proud, its radiator scoop gleaming in the sun. Pilots describe how the plane seems to surge forward when it should be slowing, as if it carries its own small jet hidden beneath its skin. They call it the Meredith effect, though most don't know the man who proved it in secret. Somewhere in the archives of the old Derby factory lies a faded schematic signed only with initials. Somewhere in the sky, a Mustang catches the light and climbs just a little faster than it should. And somewhere beyond time's reach, a man in a cold hangar smiles. The rain still falls. The engines still turn. The air still remembers. If you love true stories of forgotten heroes, groundbreaking innovations, and moments that changed history, this video is for you. Anchor subscribe now for more powerful hidden stories from World War II and Cold War aviation. Speech balloon comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Thumbs up like this video to help more history lovers discover it. Military Metal joined the mission to keep these stories alive, because history's greatest revolutions often start with one person who refused to say, "That's just how it's done."